everything is better when we are side by side. Hey, side by side, side by side, side by side. Hey, side by side, when we are side by side.
Hey, E.
Hey, T. How's it going?
It's going well. I am so energized on the backs of serving at my church's youth camp this past weekend and just seeing the incredible ways that young people are so on fire for God, watching young people pray and worship so unhinged, watching them pray for one another, encourage one another, watching them be just sold out for Jesus. I mean, at that age, I wasn't there. And I know you come from this world and you have walked with so many teens in their journey and entered their story at this point. But for me, this was a really new space. And to be able to just witness that and to be able to see, even in the brokenness of their stories, really on in their early life, that Jesus is entering and walking alongside of them. And they're so confident in knowing that he's there. I mean, I have just been weeping in the best way. And yet it just made me so hopeful. It made me so hopeful for the future. And there was a moment that I got to bring Storm, and she got to sit in the service with us because, you know, of course we play all day and all the things, but we make time to just spend time in our word and worship. And there were people that were preaching in the mornings and the evenings. And there was just this moment where I am just on my knees weeping, just thanking God. And somebody sent me this picture a couple days later, and I didn't even know, but Storm is next to me on her knees, just hands in the air. And so it was just like this really beautiful moment where I got to see where we were entering other kids' stories. But then for somebody to then send me that, it was also kind of for me in a lot of ways, God being like, and I got your baby too. And so that really settles my heart in a lot of ways. And I know we're going to talk about some of this on this episode, but it settled my heart because I think so often I stress or put this immense pressure on myself and how I parent. And so just to like have that reassurance of like, walk close to God, worship him, serve his people, love his people well. Your kids are watching and they too will. And so that was just, yeah, I'm coming off the backside and just incredible moment. So yeah, how are you?
I love that, T. I love that so much for so many reasons. Yeah, you stepped into a little bit of my world, being with all these high school kids, and man, they're wild and crazy, and I know that. But the importance of presence are really in all of our lives, but especially in those adolescent years is so important. So one, bravo, my friend, for stepping in and stepping up and jumping in, because I know you've done that in the past, but it's hard when we become parents to serve at that capacity. So I'm very, very proud of you. And then to have Storm get to be a part of it is so beautiful. I can't wait to see that picture. So I'm really, really excited that you did that, and excited to see how God continues to use you in those girls' lives. I'm doing great. This week I've been at Disney on summer vacation with my family. You guys, my boys are ridiculous. Their ages kind of tell the story enough. They're 9, 6, and 4. And I don't know why John and I keep doing this to ourselves. Why do we keep taking them to Disney? We live in Florida. We're season pass holders. I want to acknowledge the fact that we are so lucky and privileged to get to go to Disney, that Disney is like going to a park for a lot of people. And yet my kids are, I'm just keeping it real, are so ungrateful, and it frustrates me so much. And I have to remind myself, this is their age. And also, honestly, we go a lot. So I think it's become a little monotonous for them. And so we're about to take a break from Disney, not do Disney anymore for a while, kind of make them, realize how lucky they were to get to be a part of Disney. So I say all that to say we've had a great week, even though there's still been some whining and some tears. And honestly, it's just really hot here. It's just really humid and hot. So why would you want to go stand in the middle of a theme park, sweat more than you've ever sweat in your life, and then listen to whiny kids all day? I mean, it doesn't sound like a vacation. So I'm happy because we're at a resort now. It's why my background doesn't look the same if you're watching this episode. We're at our resort now, and our plan is just to hang at the pool and have some really good family time. So that's what's going on in my world.
I'm jealous that you're at Disney, or that you weren't, because, man, I love Disney. But I am excited that you guys are getting some sweet family time, and the fact that you're still turning on the mic in the midst. I know sometimes on vacation we can just want to shut everything down, but it's so important to you to still show up. And so thanks, E, because I'm really excited about the conversation we're going to have today.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Always and forever, girl.
Well, then that was a moment where I could have sang. I'm just saying, but I lost my voice yelling at them kids in the youth camp because, man, teenage hormones. So I'm not going to sing today. But how you always
what song
cheer
would
me
it have
up.
been? What song would it have been?
And forever, each moment with you. Okay. You got
that low tone. You got that low tone. We have fun, y'all. We have
back
fun.
to regularly scheduled programming because nobody else wants to hear me sing any more of that song. I'll ruin it for them forever. Man, our last episode, we had an incredible guest on, Raul, who was so timely for me in so many ways, if I'm honest, and just some of the gems that he was sharing and in the power of his testimony and the way that his testimony really just blessed us in a lot of ways. And I think as we've been reflecting on his episode, there's a question that has really arisen for us, and it is, what has your heart? One of the things that stood out to me from his story pretty significantly was the story about, him and his infidelity in a sense, or the ways that he had dishonored his wife in his marriage. And then that moment where he then realizes, hey, maybe I'm doing this with the church as well. And I just replaced one thing for another. And he started to talk about this idol, if you will, that it's become to him. And I was really thinking about that, man. Like, there are things in us, because he talked a lot about how it was feeding his ego initially, as women. Then it turned into the ways that he was serving God and things. And I just think about that in my own life. It was feeding his ego. It was feeding something in him that was important to him. Or maybe it was a place where he was lacking or was empty. And it really made me reflect on the thing of like, what has my heart? Is God really on the throne of my heart? Or what am I prioritizing? What am I worshiping? Am I worshiping self? Is it me? Is it my own ego? Is it things that aren't God? Because I think we can get into these places and spaces where we try to play God. We try to become our own God. We find things that we end up worshiping or making the God of our lives. And honestly, that's where we can get into trouble. And so what it made me question for myself is like, what has my heart? And I think even more practically, where is my worry? Where is the thing that makes me worry the most? Because I think that's where I can insert myself into my own story and try to play God versus rely on God. And so I started to really think about the things that could make me worry, whether it's like what I just talked about, worrying about my kids, are they going to be good humans? Are they going to be okay? Are people going to like them? Are they going to belong? Right. Essentially, even thinking about myself as a little kid and trying to protect my kids and worry about all of the things that I went through as a little kid and trying to prevent them from going through those things. And so I find myself in these places of worrying,
Yeah.
even truthfully being at youth camp, and how many of those kids were in a broken home. I could easily find myself worrying about, like, okay, how am I going to be this amazing wife, and putting all this pressure on myself so that Jeremy and I stay together, so that our family's intact, so our kids don't have to experience the brokenness of a broken home, because I know that feeling oh too well. And so then I can find my mind starting to get in this place of fear, if I'm honest.
Yeah.
And when I start operating out of a place of fear, I am no longer operating out of a place of love. And
Right.
the word tells us, right? Perfect love casts out all fear. But there are so many times in my life where that worry, that concern, that stress, that angst that I put on myself prevents me from operating or living out of a place of love, but more living out of a place of fear. And when I start to live out of a place of fear, where I put my trust, where I put my hope, where I put my energy, starts to become places that I would argue are idols. And I think so often we think of idols as things we love and things we worship and things that are these are things that we put on a pedestal in our lives. And sometimes I think that it's actually us just living out of fear and projecting that fear onto the things we love. And so like I said, I might love my kids so well, but if I'm living out of love, I'm going to parent in a certain way. If I'm living out of fear, that fear is
Right.
the very thing that drives me. And although I love my kids and I want the best of them, I am actually trying to be in control, trying to play God, trying to do all of the things so that I can show them I love them and give them the best and do all the things, and in essence, try to control the outcome. And I think that is where I can find myself in trouble at times. And I would argue that it's good, right? Like, it's coming from a good place. It's coming from the fact that I want my kids to have the best life. But even good things can become idols. Even
Yeah.
good things can prevent us from allowing God to have the throne of our heart, because we need to focus on God things, not just good things. And I would even argue, not even just God things. We need to focus on God, not things. Raul's episode just made me reflect in so many ways about this in my life, and not just on a parenting front, but even also, like, when I say about the good things versus God things, it made me think about how I can oftentimes feel like God has given me a vision or God has given me something to do. And I'm like, okay, God, I see the vision. Hear you wholeheartedly what you're talking about and what you're calling me to do. I have no clue how we're going to get this done. And I could feel myself start to want to get in control. And this is real. God told me to enter a season of rest. And I felt like God had given me vision to do things. And I didn't understand how me resting would allow those things to come to fruition. And so what did I do? I went out and was like, no, I'm not going to rest, God. I'm going to go try to make money, because I need to fund the things that you told me to do. Like, those things require money and resources and cushion for me to have the time and the space to think and do those things. So I tried to take it into my own hands, totally on mission to do the work God told me, but stepping out of alignment and starting to take control and arguably making the vision or the thing that God called me to do the idol, versus letting God be the God and
Yeah.
allowing him to do that thing through me.
Yeah. Yeah. TT, I think you are in good company with a lot of the saints all over the Bible, and then even the saints that aren't on the Bible. Lots of people who've gone before us in our time. And I think the key to what you are hitting on, which is so important and so good, is the fact that we grow impatient with God. And when we grow impatient with God, we begin to create idols out of what we want to happen in our life. And if we go back and we look at the history of idols in scripture, I mean, the first ones start up in Genesis and then even into Exodus. But I'm also thinking about the idols that the Israelites created, that they are led into this desert for a long period of time, and God has his promise, and they're with Moses and they're waiting for the promise of God to happen. And they're anticipating God's goodness. God made a promise to them that he was going to take care of his people, that he was going to lead them into the promised land. And while Moses is up on the mountain and he's having this conversation with God, he comes back and they've created all these idols out of these gold statues, or they call them Baal, and they're worshiping. And Moses is like confronting them on it. But what was going on was they got sick and tired of waiting on God to do what they felt like he promised them to do. And so they started to create idols. They said, okay, God, I'm going to take this into my own hands and I'm going to create something to worship because I need to put my hope in something. And that's the truth. Us as humans want to put our hope into something. It's just that we don't always put our hope into the right thing. And so when we lose hope that God is going to show up for us, we start to put our hope into other things. I talked about on my episode where I share my story that a lot of hope that I put is maybe people would love me more, or maybe I would have, I would feel better about myself if I was skinnier. And so I put a lot of my hope into, well, I'm going to lose weight and I'm going to do all these things and then I'm going to feel fulfilled. But we know the end of that story. It didn't work, and it doesn't work because the throne of my heart was occupied by losing weight. The throne of my heart was occupied by the approval of people in my life. It wasn't occupied by God. And I think when we grow impatient with God, that's when we start to create idols. And instead of us getting to focus on the things in this life that really, really matter, we start to put all of our focus into things that don't actually matter in the long run. And so, John, my husband has this acronym that he talks about in When, Where, It's Worthy. And if you read his book that's coming out sometime this fall, you'll read this, but I'm giving you a little sneak peek here. And that is T. That John talks about the most important thing that we have in this life is our T, TEA. And T stands for our time, our energy, and our attention. So the things that we're investing our time into or investing our energy into and our intention, that tells us what is on the throne of our heart. That tells us what we actually value the most. And I'm going to be honest, y'all, God isn't always the one that I'm putting my time and my energy into and attention into. And so instead of me focusing on the things that actually matter, I focus on the supplemental things, right? Like an example would be the things that matter. My relationship with God should matter most. But I'm thinking, yeah, God, my relationship with you matters most. Anyway, but I got these kids over here and I am royally afraid of screwing them up. So I'm going to overanalyze every single thing they do. I'm going to Google every single thing they're doing because I'm so worried about messing them up. Instead, if I put my time and my energy and attention into, God, I need your help. This is really hard to raise kids and I don't feel like I know what I'm doing. And I need your guidance and I need your help. Do you see the switch between the two of those, that dichotomy of fear and love, just like you said before? And here's a statistic that I read recently, TT, that it blew my mind. There's a book that's called Raising the Anxious Generation, or it's called, I think, The Anxious Generation. It's by a man named Jonathan Haidt, I think his name, and we'll put a link below because this book, I haven't read it yet, but everyone and their mother has read it, and this is a lot of where I'm getting this information from. But it was talking about how the world is significantly a safer place today in 2024 for our children than it was in 1990. But let me tell you what I was doing in 1990. I was running around like a crazy kid, and I came home when the street lights came on. My parents weren't keeping track. There was no Apple Watches. There was no tracking devices. I was running amok, stealing plywood, this is real, from construction sites to build forts in the woods. This is my childhood, y'all. My parents weren't thinking about, oh, but what if they step on a rusty nail or what? They weren't thinking about any of that. And yet the world was way more dangerous in 1990 than it is today in 2024. And I find that really interesting because we are so ruled by fear in our life. And fear, a lot of times, is what ends up on the throne of our heart. Is everything, every decision we make, everything that we do in our life, we're making it out of fear. And so we make all these decisions, or we chase all these idols, and it just sends us into this spiral of a rat race. And all we end up coming up with is nothing. We come back empty, and we're more anxious and we're more fearful.
Yeah, it's interesting you talk about like we live in a safer world than we probably ever have because we're policed more heavily than we ever have been, right? There's a camera everywhere, but yet we're so overprotective. And I even think about the other dichotomies that we're living in, right? We're more connected and have more access to anybody in the world that we ever have. And yet we're coining a loneliness epidemic, or we have more things, more money, more everything, right, than we've ever had before. And yet we're finding ourselves more empty. And that dichotomy that you talked about, it's like, man, in the presence of more of what the world can offer, we are feeling these deep, deep voids within us. I think that unless we truly allow God to be the throne of our heart, we will never, ever be able to fill that up. Those things, to your point, the rat race, right? The carrot on the stick, they will keep us chasing. I need more, right? Yet when we go from chasing things to seeking God, man, we will be filled. We'll be filled with more. We will not need anything more. I keep thinking about Jesus at the well telling the Samaritan woman, like, if you drink this living water, you will never thirst again. That is the God we serve. We serve a God that time and time again has called us to draw closer, draw nearer to him. In James 4:8, it says, draw near to me and I will draw near to you. And Jeremiah 29:13, it says, when you seek me with your whole heart, there you will find me. In Revelations 3:20, it tells us God is a gentleman. He stands at the door knocking, waiting for us to invite him in. When we seek God, when we chase God, when we wholeheartedly turn towards God, he is waiting for us to find him. He is waiting for us to draw near to him. He is begging for us to look for him because he's not hiding from us. He's probably standing in plain sight. And if we would just focus our attention, focus our gaze on him, we'd see that he's there. And he's telling us, you come near to me, I'm coming. I'm coming closer to you. I'm drawing near to you. I want so deeply to be in relationship with you. We don't serve an elusive God. He is one that wants a relationship with us. He wants to be found by us. He wants to draw near to us. If only we would give him the throne of our hearts.
Yeah. T, before we were recording this episode, I remember we were talking about seeking God and finding God. And then I know a song that's been in your head lately is that Carrie Job song, the more I seek you, the more I find you. And it just is going over and over and over in my head because it is so true that and listen to that song. I think it's called The More I Seek You by Carrie Job, right? Listen to that song. Maybe like play it over and over because the whole element, first of all, it's scriptural. It's an old song, so I like it. But also the reality that we make things so complicated. God is not, like you said, he's not an elusive God. He's not a God that is absent from us. Sometimes it can feel that way. And hear me loud and clear, my friends. I know what it is like to feel like I can't hear the voice of God. Not hearing the voice of God is such a real thing. It doesn't mean he's not present with us, but there are definitely seasons and times in my life where I feel like God has remained silent. And yet when I am pressing in and I am seeking God, and I'm doing that through, yes, reading scripture, yes, praying, but living in community, having people remind me of the truth of who God is and who God says I am. Both of those two things are really true. Yes, we need to be reminded who we are, but we also need to be sometimes reminded who God is when we forget. And reminding us those things and seeking him, we do find him. And it reminds me of what it talks about in John 15, the vine and the branches. We know it well. That God says that I am the vine and you are the branches, and whoever remains in me, I will remain in them. And that us being connected to God is so, so important. That remain part is so, so important. It's repeated over and over and over in the first 10 verses of John 15, because what Jesus is illustrating to us is us being connected to God is the only way we're going to survive this life. Us remaining in the teachings of who Jesus is, why he came, and what that means for our life is so, so important, because this life is hard, y'all. Like, it's hard. And we are crazy when we think that we can do it apart from Jesus. And trust me, I've tried, and I think we all have. And yet it doesn't work. And we come up feeling empty. And then I think about, let's go with that plant analogy. I feel like we've been talking about trees a lot on the podcast lately, which is beautiful and awesome because, I do love a garden. But
Me too.
But I know we're gardeners. Yeah, maybe we should start doing some gardening episodes. I don't know. But I think about literally a plant and being connected to its source of life, right? The sun, good soil, water. Those are the only ways that it will bear fruit. It's the only way that it can grow is when it's remaining and it's connected to its good sources. And that is so true with us. And so I think about the fruit that I long to bear in my life. I want to be a kind and loving person. I want to be so patient, especially with my kids. I want to be generous. But when I think about it, if I set out just to be generous, but I try to do that apart from God, and I do it because, let's be real, wow, I got a pat on my back for being generous. God doesn't have the throne in my heart. When I'm being kind to a person to their face, but then when I get home, all I'm doing is venting about them, I'm not actually being kind. We have all these things that we long to be, but when they're not connected to the source, they don't flow naturally. If I want to be a kind and patient parent, I have to remain connected to Jesus, and Jesus has to be on the throne of my heart. If I want to be a generous person and not be judging people with how they spend money, scripture is clear, don't let your left hand know what your right hand's doing and vice versa. If I want to actually live that way, I have to be connected to Jesus. I can't do it apart from him. He has to be on the throne of my heart. And so I think that connection piece is so, so important. And I want that to be my life's story. At the end of my life, I want to be able to say, man, I bared the fruits of the Spirit, and it was not out of my striving. I bared the fruits of the Spirit because the one thing always remained. I kept Jesus on the throne of my heart. That's so important to me.
That's so good, E, because I always joke, if you eat the fruit, check the roots. We want them roots to run deep. We want them to run deep because also we know, going back to that plant analogy, and I love that you brought that up because I could go deep and nerd out on trees and all the ways that I feel like God has used trees to speak to me and analogies and things. And I think that's the part right there. If we want to continue to produce fruit, if we want to continue to operate out of a place of love in our lives, then we gotta make sure that the roots run deep. We gotta make sure that we're connected. The very things that I talked about at the beginning, me being a mom, me loving Storm and potentially living out of fear and parenting her out of fear rather than love, that swaps. And it actually makes parenting so much easier, so much more enjoyable when I'm like, Lord, I'm trusting that you love my baby more than I do. I'm trusting that you're going to equip me to steward the very gift of my child that you've given me. But when I think it's on me to determine the outcomes of her life, that I don't mess her up or she doesn't have crazy therapy pills, well, she probably still going to have a couple in her future. When I give it to God and allow him to be in the driver's seat versus trying to step into the driver's seat, then and only then can I enjoy the journey. I can enjoy being her parent. I can enjoy seeing the world through her eyes. I can enjoy watching her grow. And also I become so much better because I'm probably a more peaceful parent. I'm probably a more fun parent. I'm probably a more calm parent. I'm less anxious. I'm less worried. I'm less thinking about all of the things that could go wrong. And so I love that you took it back to like, hey, sometimes when we're in these moments where we're operating out of a place of fear, where we play God, where we idolize ourselves, because let's be real, that's really what that is. We're idolizing ourselves and our plans for our own lives versus the plans God has for our lives. When we do that, we can find ourselves in trouble. And so I love that you talked about that. And I think the question that I have, and I'm sure many of you listening are like, okay, so how do I get rid of an idol? And I think the first step is really like just awareness, understanding that something's an idol. I think for so long, especially because a lot of the things I would argue that have become idols in my life are good things, I wouldn't have called them idols. I wouldn't have realized it. But to your point, like I'm prioritizing them above God. Those are the things that I'm actually withholding from God. Those are the things that I'm allowing to distract me from sitting at God's feet. And so I think the first part is just awareness and understanding that it is an idol in our life. Then secondly, there's a confession that has to happen. I know that when I say it out loud, when I speak life to it, when I stop the lie in my head, or when I stop isolating myself or trying to hide it, it no longer has place to be an idol, because now I'm inviting somebody to come walk alongside me. Yes, it's confession to Jesus, but there is something about confessing it to another human being, because then I think there's an accountability that comes, and we need to be held accountable. It is very easy for us to slip deeply back into those places where we're worshiping things, or we're giving our time, our energy, attention to things. I love that your husband has a company and a blog and newsletter and eventually a book called When Where It's Worthy, because I think he's really asking us like, hey, what is worthy in your life? And what are you prioritizing? Because we need to be held accountable to that. We need to be held accountable to where are we giving our time and our attention. And then I think it's really at that point when we're inviting people into our stories and we're trying to replace those things, go seek God. Go see what his word says about the thing that you've been idolizing. Go listen to his promise. Go replace the lies with truth and pray. Pray so deeply. And don't just pray, but I would argue pray and meditate, right? Like go lay it at God's feet and then create space to listen to what God has to say. I love what Raul said in his episode. He said, hey, look, I was over here, filling up my time, my attention, my ego, all of these things with women. I replaced that with the church, to go back to this example. And he said, and somebody asked me this question, not, well, what in your childhood are you looking to fill? But they asked me, well, how are you feeling it? And it was that question that unlocked so much for him to make him realize what was the root of the very void he was feeling that he was looking to replace it with, that it wasn't, the answer wasn't God. And he was like, look, they both fed the same thing. They fed my ego. They fed me trying to get the affirmation, the validation, that I'm enough, that I'm worthy. And until he had that revelation, he couldn't say, let me go to God for him to affirm me, for me to find my worth and my value in being enough from God. And so I love that he said that. And I will say, yes, it is God and people that are going to play this journey with us. And when I think about the people, I would just say, don't fight it alone. Stop hiding
Yeah.
it. There's no shame to be found in it, right? We are all struggling with something, but go find a friend
Yeah.
that you trust, that loves Jesus so deeply and is going to point you back every time. Go find a mental health professional. We
Yep.
talk about this all the time, but get a therapist
Yeah.
that not only can help you with the awareness piece, but can help you strategize in those moments when you're feeling the pull, and or get plugged in, find a pastor or somebody that can walk with you and like I said, point you back to the word, point you back to the cross, because
Yeah.
it's important. It's important to not do it alone. It's why time and time again we say we built this, because we wanted community. And when we invite people in, there's freedom in that. There's a lot of
Yeah.
freedom in the telling.
You know, I am on board for all of that, and believe, TT, that it really is the key. And I hope that that's been a key that's unlocked some things for people listening to this episode, because I know it's been a key that's unlocked some stuff for us as well. And we're still on this journey. But I think the bottom line is, when we choose to put our hope and our trust in God, we put Jesus in his rightful place in our life on the throne of our heart, meaning that is what we think about more than anything in this world, we gain clearer perspective every day. And all of a sudden, that wisdom and that discernment that we're longing for starts to become a reality. And we start to realize where our focus really needs to be. And sometimes our focus may be on one thing, and God redirects our focus and says, no, trust me on this. Put your focus on this and see what happens. But with Jesus still on the throne of our heart, it's so important. Because when Jesus is actually on the throne of our heart, I believe three things exist. I believe that we're rooted and we're established in our relationship with Christ, meaning any kind of wind and waves can come, and we are grounded and we are rooted and we're established. I believe that we've surrounded ourselves with authentic community. And that is so, so important. You guys, think about the voices that you're allowing to speak into your life. Are those voices that remind you of the voice of Jesus, or deflect from the voice of Jesus? Ask yourself that question. Because if those voices are not pointing you towards Jesus, not pointing you towards becoming better and becoming more and more who God has said you are, then I would argue those are probably voices that do not need to be in your life. And then the last one is taking care of ourselves. When I am actually rooted and established in my relationship with Christ, that I'm surrounded by people who love God and love others really, really well, and Jesus remains on the throne of my heart, I am physically and mentally in my healthiest place. I've invited people into that team, yes, but I'm in my healthiest place. Physically, I'm taking care of my body, and mentally, I'm taking care of my mind. And so those are just things that we always want anyone who listens to this podcast to walk away with, because we understand we talk about a lot of big and heavy things, but we also always want to be bearers of hope to you, that there is hope, and that really it's not complicated. Seek and you will find. So yeah, T.
I love that you said that. You ended it on seek and you will find, girl. But I'm also mad at you. I gotta be real, because you really gonna sing on the episode, knowing I sing on here all the time and I can't sing, and you just gonna flawlessly hit the notes. Okay, thank you.
Well, first of all, I don't know about flawless, and second of all, that song is so old. When you told me that you had heard that song, I was like, I have not heard that song in legit 10 to 15 years. So I'm assuming a lot of people listening to this podcast may not have ever heard that song before. So that's why I wanted to sing it. But no, I was not trying to show off my voice, because we've said, make a joyful noise unto the Lord, So all the noises are different. So that's what we have to say about that, T.
But then you'll force me to sing always and forever. Okay.
I love you. And I love when you sing, because it keeps me joyful and laughing.
There we go. There we go. It's just for joy for Jesus. Joy for Jesus.
Joy for Jesus.
Oh, sis. Well,
I
I
love
love
you.
you. I love you so much. I'm so happy we get to turn on this mic. This was a good one. It's been one I've been wrestling and rumbling with of what has my heart. And I can't lie. Like, it's a fight every day to pick up my cross, right? To pick up my cross and to make it Jesus, right? I have to truly, truly fight for that. And I hope that any of you listening here are asking yourself the same thing. That's the question we turn to you. What has your heart? What has your heart right now? And I hope that we could offer up some solutions, some points, because by no means do we claim to have it all figured out, but hopefully some of the things we mentioned here today will help you start to reprioritize what has your heart in your life so that God really sits on the throne.
Absolutely.
But we love you. We love you all. We are praying for you. We're just so excited that you're part of this community. So on that note, let the reconciliation begin.
Thanks so much for listening today. Want to stay up to date with our episodes? Then subscribe to our podcast and newsletter on our website, Come.Union.com. Follow us on Instagram at Come.Union. Rather watch our podcast? Then subscribe to our YouTube channel at Come_Union. We are so glad you're a part of this community.